The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the eerie silence of Black Hollow when Sarah McCready felt her legs falter. The world spun around her as her breath grew shallow, the burning venom spreading like wildfire through her veins. She stumbled through the twisted trees, her vision blurring, her heart pounding against her chest as the darkness closed in. She could still hear it, the soft, sinister rustling in the bushes, the hiss that had sealed her fate. But it wasn't just the snake she feared now. Something far older, far more malevolent lurked in the cursed soil of Black Hollow, watching from the shadows as she fought for her life. Each step felt heavier than the last, and with every faltering breath, Sarah knew she was not alone. The venom was not the only thing trying to claim her. Something else was waiting, something that had taken many before her. As the ground seemed to pull her down, she realized it was not just her body she was losing. Her very soul was being swallowed by the land itself. The Australian Outback, vast and unyielding, was a place where only the hardened survived. In the mid-1800s, as settlers carved out lives in the unforgiving wilderness, they battled not only the harsh elements, but the creatures that lurked within the bush. Among these creatures was one that sent shivers down the spines of even the most fearless pioneers, the black snake. More specifically, the eastern brown snake, one of the deadliest reptiles on the continent, whose venom could kill a man in mere hours. This is the story of one such encounter, a forgotten tragedy that claimed the life of Sarah McCready, a young settler woman who met a horrifying end deep within Black Hollow. Her death, lost to time, remains one of the most terrifying real-life tales of snakebite horror in Australia's early history. In the summer of 1865, Sarah McCready and her husband John made the long, grueling journey from Melbourne to the remote settlement of Black Hollow, a desolate valley surrounded by dense bushland. The settlement had sprung up around the discovery of gold, and like many others, John had been lured by the promise of fortune. Sarah, a hopeful and resilient woman in her early 20s, had followed him, despite the dangers that lay ahead. Black Hollow was a rough and tumble place, little more than a collection of tents and makeshift huts, populated by men driven by greed and desperation. The air was thick with dust, the heat oppressive, and the ever-present threat of venomous snakes kept the settlers on edge. Sarah had grown up in the city, and the untamed wilderness was foreign to her, but she adapted quickly, learning the ways of the land as best she could, while John toiled in the gold fields. It was said that the bush surrounding Black Hollow was cursed. The local indigenous people had warned the settlers to stay away from certain areas, particularly the dark, twisted grove near the edge of the settlement where few dared to venture. The settlers, dismissive of such warnings, called it Snake's Den, believing it was home to countless venomous creatures. Sarah had heard these stories, but like many, she took them as mere superstition, until the day she found herself face to face with the terror of the bush. The morning of Sarah's last day began like any other. The sun had risen high, casting an unrelenting heat over the valley, and John had left early to work in the mines. Sarah remained behind, tending to the small garden she had managed to cultivate despite the dry, barren soil. She was determined to bring a touch of home to their rough existence, planting herbs and vegetables that reminded her of her family's small garden in Melbourne. As the day wore on, Sarah noticed that their water supply was running low. The nearest water source was a small creek that ran through Snake's Den, and though she hated venturing into the grove, there was little choice. She grabbed a small bucket, her wide-brimmed hat offering little protection from the midday sun, and set off toward the creek. The bush was unnervingly quiet as Sarah walked, the only sound the soft crunch of dried leaves beneath her boots. The twisted trees seemed to loom overhead, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows on the ground. As she approached the creek, she felt a prickle of unease, though she couldn't explain why. She had been to the creek many times before, But something about that day felt different, darker. Kneeling beside the water, Sarah dipped her bucket into the creek, her mind wandering to thoughts of home and the life she had left behind. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the subtle movement in the grass behind her. It wasn't until she heard the soft, unmistakable rustle of scales that her heart seized in her chest. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the ground for the source of the sound. And then she saw it. An eastern brown snake, its slender body coiled beneath a nearby bush, its head raised slightly, eyes fixed on her. Sarah had heard the stories, knew the danger. The eastern brown was one of the most aggressive and venomous snakes in the world. A single bite could kill within hours, and there was no doctor for miles. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with the serpent, her body frozen in terror. She knew that sudden movement could provoke the snake, but standing still felt like a death sentence. The air around her felt thick, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the snake struck. The pain was instant and excruciating. The snake's fangs sank into Sarah's ankle, a burning sensation spreading rapidly through her leg. She screamed, the sound echoing through the silent bush, but there was no one to hear her. The snake slithered away, disappearing into the underbrush as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Sarah alone with the searing pain and the realization that she was in grave danger. Her mind raced, panic setting in as the venom began its deadly work. She knew she had to get back to the settlement, to John, to anyone who could help. But with each passing second, the venom spread, numbing her leg and sending waves of dizziness through her. She stumbled to her feet, clutching the bucket for support, and began to limp back toward Black Hollow. The walk, which had taken her only minutes earlier, now felt like an eternity. Her vision blurred, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the world around her seemed to tilt and spin. She tripped over a root, falling hard onto the dry earth, but forced herself to get up, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. By the time she reached the edge of the settlement, Sarah's strength was nearly gone. She collapsed in the dirt, her body racked with pain as the venom coursed through her veins. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. She could feel the darkness closing in, a cold, creeping sensation that began at the edges of her consciousness and slowly consumed her. John found her hours later, lying in the dirt at the edge of Black Hollow, her body cold and still. The sight of his wife's lifeless form was enough to bring the hardened miner to his knees. He cradled her in his arms, calling her name, but it was too late. The venom had done its work, and Sarah McCready was dead. The people of Black Hollow mourned her passing, but there was little they could do. The nearest doctor was days away, and even if they had reached him, it was unlikely he could have saved her. The bite of the eastern brown snake was almost always fatal without immediate treatment, and Sarah had been too far from help. They buried her on the outskirts of the settlement, near the edge of the bush that had claimed her life. A simple wooden cross marked her grave, and though the settlers continued with their lives, the story of Sarah's death became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the untamed wilderness. But as the years passed, strange rumors began to circulate. Some claimed that Sarah's spirit lingered near the creek where she had been bitten, her ghostly figure seen wandering the grove at dusk, forever searching for the water she had sought on that fateful day. Others spoke of hearing whispers in the wind, soft cries for help carried through the trees. The settlers, once dismissive of the indigenous people's warnings, began to avoid Snake's Den altogether, convinced that it was cursed. In the decades that followed, Black Hollow was abandoned, the gold mines drying up and the settlers moving on to more prosperous lands. The town fell into ruin, its buildings reclaimed by the bush, and the story of Sarah McCready was all but forgotten. But those who ventured near the old settlement claimed that the land itself seemed haunted. The grove where Sarah had died was overgrown with twisted vines, the trees casting long, eerie shadows over the ground. And though no one had lived there for years, the occasional traveler passing through reported seeing strange lights in the distance, or hearing the soft hiss of a snake in the brush, followed by the sound of a woman's scream. The indigenous people, who had long avoided the area, spoke of a curse that had been placed on the land, a dark energy that lingered long after the settlers had gone. They believed that the spirits of those who had died violently in the bush were trapped there, unable to move on, their souls bound to the earth by the venom that had taken their lives. To this day, the story of Sarah McCready remains one of the most terrifying and forgotten tales of snakebite horror in Australia's history. Her death, though tragic, serves as a reminder of the deadly creatures that still roam the outback, and the eerie, haunted places where the past refuses to stay buried. Though Black Hollow is now little more than a footnote in the annals of history, the tale of Sarah McCready lives on in the whispers of those who still remember. Her story has been passed down through generations of settlers and bushmen, evolving into a local legend that haunts the remote wilderness of the outback. Over time, the tale of Sarah McCready's tragic death has transformed into a chilling ghost story told around campfires, whispered in hushed tones by those brave enough to venture near Black Hollow. They say that on quiet nights when the wind is still, you can hear her footsteps crunching through the dry leaves, as if she's still walking the same path toward that cursed creek. Some claim to have seen her, a pale, shadowy figure drifting through the twisted trees, her face a mask of sorrow and pain. Others speak of strange occurrences, buckets of water mysteriously tipped over at campsites, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Those who dare to venture near the grove often return with tales of an overwhelming sense of dread, a palpable weight in the air, as though the land itself remembers the terror of that fateful day. And then, there are the snakes. The black snakes that have long called the bush home seem drawn to the place where Sarah met her end. Those who have dared to visit Black Hollow tell stories of encountering serpents that watch with unnerving intelligence, their eyes glinting in the shadows. It's said that these creatures are the guardians of the cursed ground, protecting the secrets of the past, ensuring that no one disturbs the final resting place of the forgotten souls trapped there. Though the settlement has long since faded into history, the forgotten and terrifying curse of Black Hollow lingers, entwined with the land, the snakes, and the tragic fate of Sarah McCready. Her story, once a simple cautionary tale of survival in the outback, has become something far darker, a reminder that some places are not meant to be reclaimed, and that the venom of the past still runs deep in the soil. Even now, as travelers pass by the desolate remains of Black Hollow, they are warned to stay clear of the snake-infested grove. For beneath the earth where Sarah's blood was spilled, something ancient and malevolent stirs, waiting for the next soul to cross its path.